I attended FIRA USA a few months ago, which is a great event focused on ag robotics and autonomous solutions. And just like I did last year, I wanted to share with you some reflections on the current state of the ag robotics sector.
I'll tell you the good change that I see is I see less prototypes and more commercially viable or near commercially viable solutions. And every year it gets better.
That's AgTonomy CEO Tim Bucher. You're going to hear from him as well as Ecorobotix CEO Dominique Mégret on today's episode about how autonomy in ag is much more than a way to reduce human labor needs. It's about rethinking what it means to farm better.
Zero residue food, that's our objective. And that would change the whole value chain because obviously end customers would put pressure on the big brands. And that's what we are offering. So from active ingredient to artificial intelligence, from AI to AI.
And while these solutions are finding their footing out there, we're still a long ways from widespread adoption.
Everywhere in the United States, you can operate autonomous ag vehicles, except California.
The opportunities and challenges in ag robotics and automation on today's Future of Agriculture podcast. Hello, fellow Ag Nerd. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Future of Agriculture. My name is Tim Hamrich, and every week you and I get to hear from the founders, farmers, innovators, investors, the people shaping the future of the ag industry. And as I mentioned at the top of this show, I attended FIRA USA this past October in Woodland, California, just outside of Sacramento. It's a cool event which focuses on robotics and autonomy in the field. They have a number of demonstrations as well as speakers and panels and a cool kind of trade area. I like it because it sort of feels like a crossover maybe between an ag tech conference and a true farm show. It's not quite either one. It's not quite a farm show, not quite an ag tech conference, but kind of right in the middle, which I think is kind of a cool atmosphere. This is the second year in a row I've been able to attend FIRA USA, and it's a good chance for me to sort of check the pulse of that part of the industry. The first thing I can tell you in doing so is that it definitely has a pulse. I don't get the impression that robotics is fading away due to the downturn in ag tech funding, which, side note, I know when I say downturn in ag tech funding, I realize that's a bit debatable. Every time I bring it up, somebody points to the fact that the decline is really more related to food startups and food tech and things like alternative proteins or in alternative growing systems like vertical farming. And that's where the big decline in funding has gone, and that maybe the true ag tech type funding is actually even up a bit from 2024 to 2025. Okay, that's all fine. But what I'm trying to say here is that it's clear that many of these companies, these startups in robotics and automation are finding their footing out there with customers. You heard from Charlie Anderson at Burrow just recently on episode 478, who I caught up with at FIRA that led to that interview. You're going to hear from two more CEOs today whose companies continue to make progress in getting autonomy and or automation, I'm going to kind of use those words interchangeably at times today, onto the farm. As more evidence for validation in this space, John Deere acquired Gus, a company we featured on this show maybe 4 years ago now. And that's exciting for a number of reasons, one of which surely is that it doesn't seem like a company that's going to be acquired and then buried and disappear into a big company, which we've seen several times in the past, forgotten about forever. It really, I think, in this case is a sign that John Deere was really interested in the business traction Gus was getting out in the field. And that's sort of the focus today, that autonomy and automation are happening, not in concept, not in tech, not in investment, but on the farm and with real customers. But there are also some pretty big challenges. If you were to go to FIRA USA in an attempt to understand the interest level in automation and robotics based on farmer attendance, I think you might have some concerns. In other words, there just wasn't an overwhelming number of farmers there to see the latest and greatest in robotics and automation. Some will say this is because it's been more or less the same companies at the same location for multiple years in a row now. But it's hard for me to attend an event like FIRA USA in what is the heart of specialty crop agriculture in the Valley of California and try to make the case that farmers are desperate for these types of solutions when you look around and it's mostly people from industry. And FYI, it's free to farmers to attend. So it's not like, World Agritech where there's also this huge price tag to getting there. There are also challenges with regulations, which we're going to touch on a bit today, distribution, support, troubleshooting this technology, just to name a few challenges that are still ahead for automation and robotics. There's also the challenge of marketing these solutions as not just replacements for the equipment that a farmer already owns, but as some sort of new category entirely, which I'll talk more about later in today's episode. For now, though, I'm going to share the short interview with Tim Bucher, CEO of AgTonomy. AgTonomy is a software and services company helping OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, transition to the digital era in ag tech much faster. That's how Tim describes the company. So they work with the big OEMs. We're going to talk about Kubota. We'll talk about Bobcat, big companies that make equipment like that. I should mention both of the interviews you'll hear from today were recorded live at FIRA USA. It was not in a, quiet environment. So there is going to be some background noise today, much more than in a normal episode. So please forgive that. But I think overall, everything is easy to hear and understand. So anyway, AgTonomy's approach is to partner with these big OEMs to enable them to provide autonomous options to customers. And they were at FIRA demonstrating, among other things, a swarm of multiple Kubota tractors running autonomously all at the same time.
So Kubota is a new partner of ours. They announced the partnership in June of this year. So last year at FIRA, we were not showing that. And now we're showing multiple vehicles operating from Kubota, the M5N 112. So their M5 series is very popular in orchards and vineyards, and the M5N is a narrow version, also very, very popular in vineyards. It's got enough horsepower to do so many different tasks, and we've enabled it to do spraying and mowing and weeding and disking and seeding and all kinds of different tasks that you find that we have to do in especially permanent crops.
Yeah. And so is that kind of a fully integrated solution where a grower, if they want this, they just go buy it kind of off the shelf in the Kubota equipment?
Yeah, it's basically, we don't believe in retrofit kits at AgTonomy. We believe to enable the best performance, the best reliability, and the lowest cost, you need to work with the original equipment manufacturers. I mean, think about it, right? Kubota is 135 years old. John Deere is even older. Bobcat's almost 80 years old, right? They've been building this kind of equipment for these harsh environments for decades and decades. They know how to do it better than anyone in the world. So as a startup, and this came from me being a grower too, I love tractors. The name of my own farming operation is called Trattori, which means tractor in Italian. So there's nobody in the world who would want to build a tractor company more than me. But the farmer hat in me said, well, that would be really stupid, right? Because I need the trusted brands. I need the dealer network. I need the service. I need the parts, because this equipment is for the livelihood of the business. So what we recognized was that the OEMs have to digitally transform. Many other industries have. Growers are desperate. And so is there a way we can create solutions by focusing just on the physical AI parts, the software parts, to help accelerate that transformation for them? And what we found is, yes, we can. And so today and yesterday, we've been showing the AgTonomy-enabled Kubota vehicles, the AgTonomy-enabled Bobcat vehicles, and again, multiple vehicles. And that's really where the ROI kind of falls out for growers. Because if you have to have one person controlling or overseeing one vehicle, one automated vehicle, there's not much ROI in that. But if one person can manage 10, 20, your ROI is significant. And that's really important for enterprise growers these days.
Absolutely.
And one of the beautiful things about working with AgTonomy-enabled equipment is you don't have to pay for it in terms of like CapEx, right? One of the big challenges for growers is, oh, here's a new technology and it costs $200,000, but you don't know if it works on your ranch, right? So with AgTonomy-enabled technology, you can rent, you can lease, you can purchase, And by working with the OEMs, they have incredible financing branches, and so they can support them that way. So we also have a technology assurance program at AgTonomy. If the vehicles do not work on your ranch, you can return them, no questions asked. We've been doing this for years, and guess how many vehicles we've had returned? 0, right? So you have to show me, not tell me, when it comes to working with growers. And by being growers ourselves, we have a high probability of coming up with solutions, that have a high probability of success with growers. Not perfect every time, but that's why we get it out in the hands of growers and why we have to have that connection to the growers.
Sure. And you mentioned kind of having one person to manage multiple. Where are the regulations at with all of that? We're here in California, obviously a highly regulated state. Are the regulations conducive to, operators operating multiple, or are there still bottlenecks when it comes to regulation for autonomy in agriculture?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, everywhere in the United States, you can operate autonomous ag vehicles except California. And I'm actually on the advisory committee for the standards board for Cal OSHA. And I was demoing to them earlier today, as a matter of fact. So it's about educating, and education helps with regulation. The current regulations that are in California made perfect sense back in the 70s. Because people would put tractors in gears. And by the way, I grew up on a farm, right? And my father did this, and so I did this, probably starting at the age of 8. Put the tractor in gear, and you jump off, and then you are an extra work hand to load the potatoes on the bins or whatever it is. And inevitably, there were accidents in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and so this regulation came into being, which makes perfect sense. But times have changed. Technology has changed. And so I'm working with the regulators, advising them, as well as giving them, information about how this works, right? And data, if you will. So I think great progress is being made on changing the regulations. In the meantime, they've approved that you can operate in California if there are no people present. So if no one's in the zone of danger, as they call it, you can operate. That means that you have to alert your employees to make sure nobody's in, block 10 and 20 or whatever area of the farm you're working in. You have to put up signage. And so there's a very strict, standard operating procedure for how to do this. And what's great is the worker safety is so much better because now they can be in an air-conditioned truck. Their bodies aren't being vibrated. Right in Brazil, I think there's regulations where you can only have so much vibration on a human body. Well, that's an issue for equipment operators. And so Cal OSHA is there to help protect workers. And one of the great, exciting things for me, at least, is to realize that technology can give them the ultimate worker safety, can give us the ultimate worker safety. And so we're working through all of that, but in the meantime, definitely can operate. And we have been operating in California, but no one's around. And let's think about it, right? We're on 5,000 acre, apple orchards, right? There's not that many people out there. As a matter of fact, there are 0. You do encounter animals, and the technology is smart enough to detect different object classes, such as dogs and horses and cows and things of that nature. And our software will then change its behavior based upon what it sees. So obviously it'll stop for things, but if it sees an animal like a dog, it doesn't necessarily have to alert you if you're the supervisor and give you a push notification and say, hey, I've encountered this thing, what do you want me to do? It can actually wait until either the dog moves. If it doesn't move after a minute, it can honk the horn. And, it can try to alleviate the situation so that it doesn't have to alert you. So you can sit there in your truck getting other work done or in the barn or wherever you might be, right? Or basically do sampling of crops or whatever. The exciting thing about multi-vehicle is it allows the grower to be cloned, right? If I'm sitting there operating 5 pieces of equipment and I can do other things, wow, that's a game changer.
And with you selling through these OEMs, do you have a good sense of what the customer reaction to it is? How do you stay connected to the end user customer when you're working through the OEMs?
Yeah, so we're a B2B company with the original equipment manufacturers, business to business, but then we're a B2C with the growers. So the growers actually use AgTonomy software to run the operations. So we're directly connected to the grower. And that direct feedback has been phenomenal. I always tell folks like yourself and obviously even my own employees that, hey, look, about 85% of the features we create, the customers have defined. And that's really important, right? We have some incredible stories where we've had growers that had, drains in their vineyards, kind of equally spaced. And a human operator had to go about a half mile an hour in order to make it through that drain area. And so we came up with a concept, on one day with them called a speed zone, where you can identify areas that you might be farming at, X miles an hour or kilometers an hour. But then you might want to, when you hit these areas of a rough road or these, drains, you might want to slow it down, kind of like a speed bump. And within 24 hours, we had implemented the change, deployed it, and got it to the customer the next day. And that's the kind of responsiveness that we love, because we can sit there and think about all kinds of features. We're always going to be wrong. Or let me say, 85% of the time we're going to be wrong. And so by being growers ourselves and by working directly with the growers, you can create solutions that actually work for the growers.
Right. Well, I know obviously the name of the company is AgTonomy, but if I remember right, one of your early partnerships was with Bobcat, which has certainly agriculture operations, but also a lot of other applications as well. Is AgTonomy being used outside of agriculture as well?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we just announced our operations in an adjacent market called ground maintenance. So, when you're in permanent crops, let me make it clear, that's the hardest environment to work in. When you're on, let's say, that 5,000 acre apple orchard in a tunnel where you can't even see the sky for several kilometers in each row, you can't rely on GPS, you can't rely on internet. So you got to have technology that's on board, that has everything on board. All the smarts have to be there, including safety, right? Including safety. And so when we look at other markets, adjacent markets to that, it's actually easier. And by working with the equipment manufacturers, they don't just have equipment like you were pointing out in agriculture. Kubota has ag tractors, they have ground maintenance equipment, they have construction equipment, Bobcat, same thing. Other OEMs, same thing, right? And that's why working with tier one OEMs helps bring technology across these segments. So I'm pleased to say that we are operating in the states of Georgia and Florida in sod farms, turf. And if you look in our booth there, you'll actually see a big turf mower. And you'll see videos of it operating as well.
That's cool. Yeah. Are there any stories of applications for AgTonomy that you're like, I never really had that in mind when I started the company?
Yeah, how much time do we have? What's more important than the applications that we didn't know about? The impact we didn't know about. So here we are. Okay, we're going to automate not just the navigational aspect, but the workload, meaning you don't drive a tractor from point A to point B. You do work while you're doing that, right? And so bringing the implements into the picture is really important. So we can actually sense the engine load. And when the engine load, we know we're on flat land or a hillside because we have inertial measurement units, these sensors that can measure, what angle the vehicle is at. And we can see that, we're on a flat land, but all of a sudden the engine load got heavier and we know we're mowing. So that must mean like we're in thicker grass or cover crop, whatever you're doing. Well, if you were just going 6 miles an hour, the tractor would bog down, or worse yet, you would do a really bad job of mowing. So we dynamically modulate the speed, the RPM of the implement, and basically do it like a human would do it, right? So you can't just look at the tractor. You have to look at the whole ecosystem. And that's something that we really believe in. But the impact of automation is what I was getting to. When we started, we had no idea that automation would bring fuel savings. But it makes sense now that we've gotten this feedback from customers, because a human doesn't necessarily route completely efficiently, right? So computers do optimal route plans. Computers will always lower and raise the implement at exactly the right time, will always set the RPMs to exactly the right, speeds, and will always make the most efficient turns. So voila, you have fuel savings on the order of 20 to 30% now, right?
Well, humans get impatient too.
And humans get impatient too, right? And, look, because of the shortage we have with skilled operators, I would say the quality of the skilled operators these days is not as great. And you can ask any grower today, do you have more accidents with your operators today? Meaning you hit a tree or something like that, right? And the answer is yes. And so automation can bring that additional safety and better quality of the job. And here's another byproduct that we'd never thought of, right? So the average age of the farmer now is 60 years old. The younger generation is not taking over farms. I have 3 children. None of them are taking over my farm. Okay, so I'm going to have to sell or do something, in the next decade, let's say. What happens with technology is you're now attracting a younger labor force. because you're providing solutions that you can do from your smartphone, from your tablet, in an air-conditioned truck. Children who grew up on farms know how hard it is. So today, because there's more opportunities for them, elsewhere, they're not staying on the farm. But now when they see this, the Farmville simulator game, now you see Farmville for real, they're like, hey, that's really cool. And I want to come back and I want to help be part of, my roots, which is agriculture, but do it via ag tech.
Right. Well, what's as you think about the industry, and of course, I want to ask you specifically about AgTonomy too. What is the next kind of unlock, the next level up, for lack of a better term, for autonomy in agriculture?
Well, every day there's a new challenge. One thing I tell my engineers is we have infinite number of challenges to solve because you can do things better every day. There's new crops, there's new tasks that you might want to do, right? We only support about 110 implements today, implement types. And the reality is there's, thousands of implements, right? And so over time, we kind of bring that in. And so the most exciting thing for me, which doesn't sound too exciting probably for your listeners, is scaling, right? Because with scaling, you make impact. I'm an entrepreneur. My definition of an entrepreneur is somebody who likes to make impact. Not money, not fame, but impact. And that's the most exciting place I feel we're at with AgTech, including with the show. Like, the show is different this year than last year. One of the reasons why, I'll tell you the good change that I see, is I see less prototypes and more commercially viable or near commercially viable solutions. And every year it gets better. Now, I think we have less growers here than we've had last year. And one of that reason might be this Farmageddon thing that's going on, right? And so travel, everything now is, we have to watch, dot our I's and cross our T's on all of our financials, like really carefully these days. But it's pretty exciting for me to think about the impact that all of this ag tech can have in literally the most important industry in the world, which is feeding the world.
And to kind of dive into the details on like, what does it take to scale? Is it an awareness challenge? Is it a perception challenge, or just I need to see it work on my farm? What are the kind of bottlenecks that need to be broken through to scale?
Yeah, that last item you mentioned, I need to see it work on my farm, is the most important thing. You need to show it working accurately on the operations that exist today. And when it does, the word of mouth spreads quickly. Then you back that up with trusted brands that have dealer network, service parts, etc. That's a winning solution. That is a recipe for success. If you're trying to push rope as a small little startup building machines, that's a real big challenge, and the impact isn't there. You're just not going to get scale. So, some people call AgTonomy crazy for like, oh, you're not building stuff. We're like, yeah, we're building stuff. We get to focus on the software pieces and not reinvent the wheel on equipment that we could never make better than these OEMs. So we think that the winning recipe from the standpoint of an ag tech company is one that actually works with the OEMs, that works with regulators, that really works with the entire industry, and is not some, tech company that thinks they know better, right? It's called ag tech for a reason. It leads with ag, not technology.
Yeah. Well, and I think, companies like yourselves and Gus that are kind of pushing some of these OEMs in this direction are really making a big impact, because that's going to build a lot of trust and also a lot of support for autonomy.
Yeah. So first of all, we help accelerate them, right? Which is important. These are big companies and they have lots of step-by-step quality metrics and whatnot. And it's not that startups don't have those quality metrics, but we don't have as much overhead, if you will. And so we can move faster. So we help accelerate them, number one. And then to your second point, then they bring the trusted brand name. And boom, boom, now you scale.
And scaling is exactly where this ag robotics industry is today and what they're focused on from here. We've gone from concepts to prototypes to early adopters, as Tim described there. But now the question becomes what it takes to cross the chasm, so to speak, to widespread adoption. And a big driver toward that end is always going to be labor and labor costs, not so much the question of how do we eliminate people from the farming operation, but how do we maximize the returns we can get from the people we have on the farm? Now, that could be in labor savings directly, or as another example, it could be in producing a healthier crop with higher yields that requires less chemical inputs. That is the focus of our next guest. You're going to hear from Ecorobotix CEO Dominique Mégret. Ecorobotix is a smart implement company, essentially providing ultra-high precision spraying to reduce the chemical usage and improve the overall crop care. So whereas Tim Bucher at AgTonomy is helping the OEMs to offer autonomous equipment, Ecorobotix is selling an implement that uses automation to be much more efficient. And before I spoke with Dominique at FIRA USA, I was already expecting to hear the story about how much less chemicals farmers can use with their technology, and that's absolutely true. But the story goes even farther to yield improvement by eliminating phytotoxicity issues or off-target effects of spraying, all the way to the vision of residue-free food. It's definitely interesting, and from listening to Dominique, I think you'll get a sense of why Ecorobotix has generated so much buzz, especially over the past year or two. They've definitely been one of the early successes in this industry of getting the equipment on farm and getting positive feedback from farmers. And I asked Dominique to start our conversation by describing what he's hearing back from those farmer customers about what value the technology is having for them. He says it all starts with the company's Swiss roots and their extreme focus on precision.
Well, it's all about precision. And for Swiss people, precision is not enough. It's ultra high precision, and that's where we are positioned. So we've designed a machine to have the very best framework to have, for example, no drift and to have no light constraints, or under a cap, you can get the best precision. And this is what has been driving us since the beginning.
And are you focused on vegetable growers, or are you kind of working across multiple crops?
Yes, we started with high-value crops first. That's where you get most value. And this is not so much about productivity. This is more a matter of doing quality work for high-value crops.
And how is, my focus is generally on the U.S., so I don't know as much about what's going on in other countries, but how is the U.S. market different? And maybe talk about the importance of like the North American market for Ecorobotix.
Yes, so we've got 4 years experience in Europe versus 18 months in the U.S. So what I can compare is first the size of the farms, much larger here than Europe. Also expectation, technological side are higher here than Europe. You're getting to the 95% clean, or even not actually 100% clean fields. In Europe, there is more acceptance for weeds and biodiversity and trees around fields, which you don't see in the US. So it's a different environment. But ultimately, we have to adjust ourselves to the local constraints. So it's not one size fits all. For example, onion, we have developed an onion algorithm for France first, but then we have 20, 30 different types of algorithm to cater for local differences, like the color of the earth, the fact that some have got wind, like salty wind in Oregon, and you've got barleys in between onion rows to protect against wind. This is very specific to that region, so we have to develop a different algorithm for each segment.
And is it those algorithms that allow for kind of that ultra high precision you were talking about?
Yes. Otherwise, you don't get the same quality level. It's easy to get to 80% weed recognition, but if you want to get to the 95% I was talking about, to make very demanding customers happy, then you have to invest much more resources for the last 10 to 15%. So that's why we've ramped up the organization to 250 engineers. And we are about to hire another 100. So we're really putting a lot of effort on the R&D side to improve the quality.
And could you give us a sense of how those algorithms are developed, the process you have to go through in general?
So we first take pictures of the local field. Literally, we go in the field, take pictures, because that helps train the algorithm. And the more pictures you get, the better the algorithm it will. So it's a machine learning process. And we do have some automation, because since we're doing it over 70 different models, so we have now developed pretty advanced automatic algorithm development features, but still we need to have the local pictures done first. And then you train the machine, and over time, once it's developed for a customer, the customer goes into the field and it keeps taking images until you keep improving the algorithm over time.
Oh, very interesting. And, if I'm a farmer, the difference between, 80% precise and 95% precise is a lot. I mean, that's significant, but it also could be hard to picture when I'm making purchasing decisions. Like, okay, everyone's saying they're pretty accurate. They're saying they're the most accurate. How do I make that decision as far as which direction to go? How do you handle that?
The moment of truth is when you touch the plant or not. So if you don't have enough accuracy, you can't take the risk of touching the plant because you would destroy the crop. And what we've reached, the level of trust and quality is so high, even if there is wind or if the machine wobbles and goes left and right and there are holes up, down. This is the harsh environment I'm talking about. In that environment, we have lots of corrective measures, and that's why we've put so much emphasis, so much resources, so that we are now in a situation where we can do non-selective pesticide spraying. That means without touching the plant. And we guarantee it within a half an inch or a few very small. We have different size of safety zones. And with this, that's a farmer decides what's the safety zone. And we would not touch the crop nor the safety zones, but all the rest is up for grabs, so to say. And that's why we need to be in the 95% precision, because all the real work, the quality work is done very, very close to the crop. And you don't want to touch the crop if you're using non-selective pesticides. And that's why we're unique worldwide. What is easier to do is to use selective pesticides. That means you can spray a little bit everywhere, even on the crop. It doesn't kill the crop, but that is not so clean work. And it has also other negative side effects that the crops have phytosanitary or phytotoxicity issues, as we say, because they're still touched by chemicals. So it might sound a bit too technical, but the point is the devil is in the details, and that's where we are focusing.
Sure, no, not too technical at all. I'm curious about like labeling and regulations. Is that because this is a whole new way to spray? Is it going to require the industry to adapt sort of how they approach those types of issues?
It is a disruption. It's a new category and a disruption because it's not just about technology. You're talking about new methods of growing vegetables. New inputs even, because if you start spraying non-selective pesticides, instead of doing chemistry intelligent certain molecules, you can start using non-intelligent molecules. So that's why I'm saying half jokingly, we go from AI to AI, because we go from the so-called active ingredients. That's where all the intelligence used to be. Chemistry would be able to decide which crop to kill, which one you don't want to kill. So from active ingredient to artificial intelligence, from AI to AI. So there is a transfer of smartness, if you want, from the molecule to computer vision and very specific spot spraying.
I like that from AI to AI. I like that. That's really cool. And so I imagine also there's a story here of residues. I think it's being elevated in the consumer consciousness about, residues on food. And it seems like this is a way, to keep the selective residues off of.
Exactly. Zero residue food. That's our objective. And that would change the whole value chain, because obviously end customers would put pressure on the big brands, the Nestle's and Unilevers of this world, who want to have zero residue suppliers up to the farmer. And that's what we are offering.
And it seems like the economics of these machines are changing too. I don't know about Ecorobotix specifically, but in general, they're trending into a more affordable direction for farmers. Is that the case?
Yes. What means affordable? We think in terms of a return on investment. And we have three levers for the farmers. It reduces input cost, so less pesticides, 80 to 95% less cost. That's a lot. But also less labor cost, because in the US, we do much more hand weeding than in Europe. In vegetable, you've got hundreds of thousands of people doing by hand, but it's scarce labor. It's difficult to find the people, to train them, to retain them. Weeding is a super hard work. As a son of a farmer, I can tell you, it's a good motivation for me to get into technologies to avoid doing the hand weeding. And a third, it's about yield improvement. And that's the cherry on the cake, which is emerging as a nice surprise on top, which is by far the most important one, is the fact that you don't touch the plant anymore, then it grows faster, up to 30% faster. And that would obviously, it's not scientifically proven at scale because we can only prove it where we've done it. And we've got about, we've done 750,000 of acres so far. We're getting to the 1 million acres, but this is taking time. But the more we do, the more amazing result we see where the onions, for example, they look bigger, better shape, actually in a couple of weeks faster to market because they have less phytotoxicity because they haven't been touched by selective pesticides. So they are simply growing faster. And this is now we've got about 20 universities worldwide, the best universities testing it in their field, demonstrating the difference between using conventional selective pesticides and what we are doing is non-selective. And it shows very interesting results, but it takes time to prove it. For scientific reasons, you need 3 years to really test it, and you can't just claim it after a couple of months.
But what it sounds like you're seeing, though, is that those selective pesticides that were not killing the crop were hindering it.
Yes, indeed.
That's really interesting.
But that's why I mentioned it's a disruption, because it impacts the whole value chain, not just the technology, but also the users and the input companies and the regulation, obviously. Because once you can prove you can do it at scale at a lower cost than the traditional way of doing it, that's when regulation can start pushing in a certain direction because there is an alternative. As long as there is no alternative, it's very dangerous to ban molecules if that's what's happening in many countries. Like in France, there was this issue about neonicotinoids, which you can't use for sugar beet. So the farmers go on strike, and then the government had to change the law. Otherwise, you don't get sugar anymore produced in that country. And we've got dozens of examples like that. I mean, molecules are getting banned also in the US. And second, you get lots of superweed, so resistance against pesticides. So you constantly need to bring new active ingredient, so let's say molecules to the market. That's one way to do it. But the other way is to step back and say, look, why don't we do it differently? We just simply don't touch the crop anymore by being super precise. It's the same with personal medicine. Instead of having medicine after each other with side effects, and if you could target early enough, so you kill, if somebody's got cancer, we can target the very first sick cell before it spreads throughout the organism. Then with very little ingredient, you can kill it. But it's all about tracking back time, backwards, so to say, to come up as early as possible before it spreads. And that's exactly the same with weeds. Our weeds, the weeds we're talking about, they are a couple of millimeter size. So in inches, I don't know how it is, but it's basically, you've got a couple of days where they emerge, and with the human eyes hardly can see it, especially at 4.5 miles an hour. But computer vision is exceptional for that. They can spot super tiny weeds, and before they become half an inch, they get destroyed with very little active ingredient.
Yeah, which is, huge savings in and of itself as well, but also very effective. There still is that threat of resistance, right, to the active ingredient over time. Ultimately, what do you say? Some people say, well, we should just be going straight to things like lasers instead of using the herbicide at all. Is that something you all are looking into as well?
Yeah, that's a valid alternative, but we can't. On top of that, if you're talking about fungicides and insecticides, obviously it's a different category because that you need water to spray it on the crop. And we do that as well. So laser is more specialized on weeding, which is replacing herbicides, liquid form. And it works very well when you have to be super precise, but it's a very expensive and very slow process. The spraying has got other advantages, some disadvantages as well. It's not as precise. The spot size is broader, but it has other advantages.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's complementary technologies.
And where would you say we are in terms of on the road to 100% adoption in these crops that you're in right now? How early are we in this process?
We are pretty much at the early stage if you take the total market. But pioneers are already into this game. At least they've been there for the last couple of years. So we see vast adoption with the innovative farmers, the innovative growers. They like this stuff because they want to be the first one to try and test, and if it works, to show off the results.
Well, I appreciate you doing this interview. Thank you, and sorry about some of the background noise. It wasn't that loud earlier. I'm not sure what's going on the other side of that door. But is there anything else you'd like to add or emphasize before we stop the recording here?
No, there is no way back. Once you've tasted high precision crop care, plant by plant, as we say, there is no reason to get back to broadcast and the way it used to be, because it's essentially win-win. You use less chemicals, less environmental impact, so less problem with human health associated with it as well. So less is more.
Well, I think Ecorobotix is a great example of how adding automation to something like spraying can have a number of advantages that we're still just now discovering and validating. And while labor challenges has been a primary driving factor for a lot of robotics and automation to be explored and developed and applied to agriculture, there are clearly other advantages out there as well. And I thought Dominique did a great job of explaining that. One question that I found myself reflecting on after FIRA USA was, does this technology of robotics and autonomy and automation, or whichever term you want to use, does it represent a new category in agriculture, or is it more just a digital way to sell farm equipment? It's sort of a feature. And you may hear that and think, oh, I don't see why that really even matters. But I think in these cases, if you look at just in these two interviews today, AgTonomy sounds more like the latter. It sounds more like a feature to be added on to equipment. You, as a farmer, are buying the same machine from the same supplier with just these new features that we're calling autonomy. Whereas maybe Ecorobotix sounds a little bit more than just the old way of spraying. It sounds almost like something else entirely, perhaps a new category. Now, why does all that matter? I think if it is a new category, there will be category winners and losers. If you go back and listen to episode 430 with Dan Schultz, you'll hear more about what it means to be a category winner. And it's kind of exciting if there are new winners and losers, especially when you consider how consolidated the ag equipment space is. But if these end up kind of just being features, then it's a lot more likely that they'll all just get absorbed into the same winners. We have a pretty consolidated ag equipment space with some very large players that could essentially, buy up the add-ons, the features that they want. And I guess you could argue that the end result to the farmer or to agriculture, to the future of agriculture, is the same. But I think it's worth thinking about, especially for you entrepreneurs out there that are trying to create something in this space, to think about, am I creating a feature or a new category? So might be good to listen to that episode 430 again if you haven't already. Just one more thought before I close out, because it just happened, I think, this week. I'm sorry, this one's getting a little bit long, but Jason Fried of Basecamp, software entrepreneur that's very well known and very followed on X, just posted something on that platform he titled The Big Regression. It was about some experiences he's had with new homes that have all the latest and greatest digital technologies and how they're actually pretty terrible. Nothing works. Everything seems to break. And people like him and others are just longing for the simple things that last. And they wonder, do we need all this kind of like smart home technology that are in new homes? Or is it just like we kind of just need the stuff that we used to have that just lasted? It made me think about ag tech, because there have been people on the show that have drawn comparisons to smart homes and then the smart farms. So this is certainly something for the whole ag tech industry to keep in mind as technology continues to scale. That post on X seemed to blow up. At least it was all over my algorithm. So I think it resonated with a lot of people, and I'll link to that so you can check that out, because I do think it definitely has some connections to ag tech and to the topic of today's episode in terms of like bringing more and more digital technology hardware onto the farm. I'll also link to last year's AgRobotics reflection so you can listen to that and kind of compare these two if you'd like. Anyway, just a few thoughts here to end out today's episode. Thank you so much to Tim Bucher and to Dominique Mégret for taking the time during FIRA USA for these interviews. Sorry about the background noise there. We were live and in person, and there was a lot of other people around. And last but never least, thank you for your time and your attention. I do not take it lightly. I'll be back next week with another story of ag innovation.